When it comes to describing myself, I'd like to say I'm a very easy and simple bloke. I love copious amounts of smoked meats on the barbecue, I love drinking beer, and most importantly, I love punishing low-tech tribal people in video games. And today's mod is perfect for that. Introducing Brian's Stratagems. Previously on this channel, we have reviewed Brian's Missiles, and it was a fantastic mod. So when I saw this pop up on the Steam Workshop page, I knew I had to check it out and see if it lived up to my expectations of his previous mod. Let's get into things and start with the content. So let's start by looking at the content of the Steam Workshop page. What is there and what do we see? So we start off with the initial thumbnail here. Really like the design of this. You can quite clearly tell that there is inspiration from HELLDIVERS 2 here. The initial photos and everything are really nice, shows off the mod in game and gives us a bit of context, and there's also a video explaining how everything works. Getting into the bulk of it, we have an introduction with the content and everything listed with pictures, and we have the ways in order to access these stratagems. The only way I can see this being improved at all is with some GIFs, and that is it. Great so far. So before I show you things blowing up, we need to actually look at how the mod works and how we actually achieve getting the stratagems. So the stratagems themselves look like little Pokeballs. We have the stratagem belt, and the regenerative stratagem belt. This is all accessed and made through the stratagem workbench, and then we have access to something called an atom materializer. And as we saw in the Steam Workshop page, there is a custom research tab for this mod. We have access to 10 new researches, all with the prerequisite of having fabrication, so that everything in this mod is fairly late game for you to access. And within these 10 researches, we get access to all the different individual stratagems, all the different things that we can use, and so on and so forth. So now that we know vaguely what tech it requires in order to access stratagems, and we know what everything looks like, let me show you how to actually access stratagems in order to use these against those poor tribals. So what we do is we grab our colonists and we force them to make a stratagem. This is made fairly quickly, and once we have it made, we equip it to the colonists as if it was like a shield belt. With this, we can then select stratagem. This will then take us back to the workbench, and we'll need to access the workbench once again to select a stratagem in the first slot. And at this current moment in time, I only have one stratagem research, so I can only access the one. We then equip that stratagem, and then theoretically we have that stratagem that we can then use. I do have my issues with this system, and we will get further into that later in the compatibility section. So we now know how to make them, we know how to use them, and we know what tech that we need. What does this actually look like in game? So what we're going to do is go through every single stratagem and vaguely sum up what they do and how good they actually are. So first, the orbital precision strike. We throw our stratagem and down comes the laser which guides the missile, and boom, nice big bang, nice. Next, the orbital smoke strike. This one, very self-explanatory, throws down a huge smoke screen that we can use against our ranged enemies. Next, the orbital airburst strike. This one comes down and does a lot of concentrated damage on a very small area. I really like this one. Next, the orbital EMS strike, and once again, very self-explanatory. Just a huge amount of EMP damage comes off, great for fighting mechanoids. The rail cannon strike, this one comes down and affects an extremely small amount of area and does a huge concentrated amount of damage. Next, the orbital laser, and this one genuinely surprised me because of how this one worked. I kind of just thought that this would be a big orange beam that came down and did some fire damage, but no. This one was like a big old fat American bloke that'd gone to the African savannah and was on their next trophy hunt mission. It chases down this rhino and absolutely obliterates them. Doesn't do much damage, but it was like a heat-seeking missile for laser damage for animals and just any other hostile creature. Cool! Next, the 180mm HE barrage. This one was very interesting. It affects a very large area and doesn't do too much, but also does a lot because it's highly inaccurate. This one I kept thinking it was over and it just kept going and going and going and going. So much so that I started the next test for the 380mm HE barrage. This one does the exact same, the same sort of high amount of radius with highly inaccurate results, but does a catastrophic amount of damage here. These ones are very brutal, but I felt like the 180mm one was definitely better. Next, the Eagle Cluster Strike. This one does pretty much the exact same as the Orbital Airburst Strike, but just of a bigger area, and I'm going to assume a little bit more damage. Next, the 500kg bomb. This one is basically just a better orbital strike, which is the very first one we looked at. It does a bigger radius of effect and a slightly bigger explosion. Next, the 110mm rocket pods. This one, I'm not too sure what it actually does. There's a few rockets kind of in a concentrated location, and that's about it. Would maybe like to see these spread out just a little bit so I can see what's going on. Next, the Eagle Smoke Strike, and as it says on the tin, it's just smoke stratagem once again, but does provide a little bit extra smoke. Next, the Napalm Airstrike does exactly what it says on the tin. Once again, it's basically just a few incendiary missiles coming down and setting fire to everything. Next, the autocannon turret and the machine gun turret. These do exactly what you expect. They drop down 2 turrets, an autocannon turret and a machine gun turret that last for a certain amount of time, and they're very good for helping in defensive situations. And then lastly, the Hell Bomb Stratagem. This one kind of confused me a little bit. What you do with this one is you call it in and it lands. Once it's landed, that's not it. You then have to use a colonist to go and arm it, from what I can tell. And then once you've armed it, you get about with your business and you honestly forget it exists, and then it explodes when you're in the middle of doing something else. This one does an absolutely ridiculous amount of damage, but it takes an extremely long time for it to actually kick in. So that's all the stratagems, and they look fantastic for wiping out those pesky tribals that aren't giving you very much to trade with. So how are we going to actually use this in a combat scenario? So as I've shown off earlier in this video, the stratagems are going to be used by making them, selecting them in the workbench to then equip the stratagems to the stratagem Pokeball. So how does this work with the stratagem shield belt, and how does this work with the stratagem regenerative shield belt thing as well? So for the first time in mod review history that I generally couldn't believe, I'm not going to be able to show you the stratagem belt because I couldn't get it to work. I did mention earlier I do have my issues with this system. It was so buggy. The only way that I could get the stratagem belt to actually work was within dev mode, which is not the point, which I was genuinely super disappointed with. I've never had this issue with a mod review where something just has not worked because it's been so buggy. However, I was able to get the regenerative stratagem belt to work absolutely fine, so I'm going to assume that that works the exact same way as with the normal stratagem belt. So what we do is we make it, we then select our 4 stratagems, say, that we want to be able to using with this, and then we can just go one at a time. We can select them in whatever order we want. If we want to throw 4 of the same one that's equipped to the stratagem belt, then that's great. If we want to do a different one instead, then we can also do that. Really like the idea of this, and I think the concept is there, but I don't think the system is very Rimworld. So that's going to be it for the content section, and generally speaking, I really like what's going on here. I really like the HELLDIVERS 2 stratagems put into Rimworld here in order to deal with those pesky insects burrowing up all over my map. I like being able to use them against mechanoid sieges, and most importantly, when tribals come onto my map and they offer me bad trades, I can just throw a stratagem on them and get rid of them, and it's great. The Steam Workshop page is really, really good, can't really get much better than that, and I think the wide variety of stratagems that we've got, not only are they all going to be used for dealing with these pesky tribals, but they're also going to be used for defending our base, which I think is amazing. But I have never reviewed a mod so far on this channel where I've not been able to get a part of the content to work. And for me, that is huge. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I had pretty high expectations when I'm coming into reviewing Brian's mod here, when his previous missile mod was so good. And it has let me down quite a lot that I just couldn't get this to work. Yes, I could use workarounds in dev mode to get everything working. I could have showed you all off in that way, but that's not the point. You're not going to be wanting to use dev mode every single time you want to use a content feature, and I don't think that's a good thing. So for my content score here, I do really like what's here, and I want Brian to know this, and I'm talking to you, Brian, if you're watching this. I love this mod and what it does, but I can't give it a good score if it doesn't all work. Like, I just can't. I haven't been able to cover some of it. So unfortunately, I am going to have to give you a slightly smaller score than I would like. So I'm going to be giving the content section here a 7 out of 10. So next, let's move on and look at the quality of the items added by this mod, the stratagems themselves, the stratagem belt, and the stratagem workbench table. So zooming in on everything, and I like the quirkiness here. In the nicest way possible, it's kind of obvious this has been done in Microsoft Paint, and that's not an insult because I could never do anything as good as this in Microsoft Paint. I like the quirkiness of this here. It brings out an almost personality in this mod. The stratagems feel like they've had love and care put into them. Yes, I could say it's not the best quality, and yes, I could say the textures and everything could be a little bit better, but I like this. We can even see that there's a difference between these 2 stratagem belts. The little details have been taken care of here, just not necessarily in like the most professional quality, which is definitely not a requirement. And then looking at the stratagems actually in game and how they work. I like the way that we throw them like a grenade that we can visually see, and then the big laser that comes up to show where the orbital guidance stuff should be landing. It's the small things that really matter here, and I love the way it kind of goes up in the sky and you know that it's summoning down a little bit of American freedom. And then once that great big orange laser goes and we see our stratagem come down, we can really see the influence from Brian's missiles here, the big boy missiles themselves, that you can actually see it, which is really nice. We can zoom in on it, we can look at it, we can inspect it, and we can see that this is an actual missile and stratagem coming down to deal the damage. So that's going to be it for the quality section, and to me this doesn't feel like a mod that's been rushed out. To me this feels like Brian spent a lot of time and care and love into this mod. The quirkiness really shows off the mod itself, and there's a little bit of personality there that really comes through here, and I really like that. It's lovely to see a mod that's not completely polished to the absolute brim, and it's not the creme de la creme of mods. It feels natural and it feels organic and it feels right. Yes, I could say that the texture quality is not the best and we could have something a little bit more professional. And now I'm not going to say I wouldn't like that, but I'm also not opposed to texture quality like this because a little bit of uniqueness goes a long way and it really shows off the mod itself. So for me, for the quality of the section of this review, I'm going to be giving this a 8 out of 10. So next let's move on and look at the balancing of this mod. Now obviously this is a mod that's been inspired by Helldivers 2 and the stratagems that are used within that. They are quite powerful and I am expecting them in this mod to also be quite powerful. So what I'm expecting here at the very beginning here is that stratagems are not going to be too easy to access, and they're also going to be fairly balanced in the way that we can't overuse them with the regenerative stratagem belt and the stratagem belt itself. So let's start by looking at the tech cost and the resource cost. So first with the tech cost, we need to bear in mind that in order to access the very first research, in order to get to the stratagems, we need to have the prerequisites already done of fabrication and transport pods. So already we're looking at being able to access stratagems fairly late in your playthroughs in terms of your vanilla playthroughs, which for me is the perfect time to be able to access these stratagems, because at that stage of your playthroughs, all your mechanoid raids, all your tribal raids, all of your insect raids, they're going to be pretty hefty. And I think that having to access these stratagems at this point is perfect. The rest of the things in the actual research tree itself, all of them roughly costing between 1,000 and 3,000 research points. Once again, for this stage in your game, and you're still going to have to sit down and get somebody to research all of this, which is going to be even more time. The time balancing and the tech cost here is perfect in my opinion. So next let's look at the actual resource cost in order to make the stratagems, the stratagem belt and the regenerative stratagem belt. Starting off with this, in order to make one singular stratagem is 500 steel, 15 plasteel and 2 components. So quite a lot of steel here, not too much on the plasteel and component side, kind of makes sense. This is a kind of cost that I am generally expecting when most of the time you are going to be able to get your stratagems back so you can reuse them for something else. I don't think this cost is too bad. The stratagem belt, however, this costs less steel at only 250 steel, more plasteel at 75 and more components at 25. I'm not sure what the jump is here and why we're reducing the amount of steel when I'm going to be assuming the steel cost is to make one stratagem. So surely the stratagems should be then 4 times as much at 2,000 steel. Maths ain't maths in here. What I'd like to see is either this stratagem belt be reduced in cost in terms of the components and the plasteel and an increase in the steel, or see the base stratagem reduced in steel cost and increased in component cost. Next, the regenerative stratagem belt, once again costing 250 steel, 75 plasteel, and this time 50 components, and also an atom materializer. This one, once again, the steel cost seems a little bit low. The 50 components being quite a lot as well, but also kind of makes sense. The atom materializer, I couldn't work out how to get this. I don't think it's actually listed in the Steam Workshop page how we access this. I'd imagine it's a late game quest reward because it's not actually craftable. So I understand the resource cost, kinda. If I want to look at this from so many different perspectives and try to reasonably work out why everything costs what it is, I kinda get it, but not really. The resource cost here doesn't seem quite right, especially if you're just making one stratagem. I think that we need a kind of rebalance of the steel cost to the component cost, and even increasing the plasteel cost. And I could potentially see the argument of seeing a uranium cost as well, or even an advanced component cost for the stratagem belt and the regenerative stratagem belt itself. I feel like we could potentially see these cost a little bit more, and then when we look into the balancing of how these actually perform against enemies, as we also see that some of these are definitely better and worse than others. So let's get into the nitty gritty of things. Let's look at how these stratagems actually perform in a combat situation, how much damage we're going to be dealing to groups of enemies. So what I've got here is 5 colonists. 1 with flak armor, 1 with recon armor, 1 with marine armor, 1 with cataphract armor, and 1 with cataphract armor and a shield belt. The shield belt one is very important because in my previous test against Brian's missile mod, the colonist with a shield belt always survived. So let's start with the orbital strike. This one already reinforces my theory that the shield belt here is completely negating any damage. Every single colonist here dies, apart from the one with the shield belt. Next, the airburst strike. This one comes down and kills everybody apart from the cataphract that isn't wearing a shield belt, which is very interesting. Next, the rail cannon strike, and as we saw in the content section, this does an insane amount of damage in one specific location, obliterating the colonists in the middle. Next, the laser stratagem. I call this one in. It does a little bit of burn damage to the colonists, not really doing too much, kind of a bit of a warm tickle if you ask me, then immediately leaves my area and goes on the hunt for any wildlife it can get. It's very powerful against anything that's not armored, basically. This one would be great for dealing with tribals, which is always a great recommendation if you ask me. So as we can see, so far, colonists and actual human baseliner pawns aren't doing very well against Helldivers 2's stratagems. So what I did is I went back to the drawing board and I looked at Helldivers 2. This is a pretty much horde-based game which you're going against insects and mechanoids. So I thought mechanoids are pretty strong, let's change things up. So I spawned in 88 mechanoids of varying qualities. We have centipede burners, centipede blasters, we have things with shields, militars, literally is a pretty wide variety here of any sort of mechanoids. So let's continue with the testing and go on to the 120 HE barrage. This one did a pretty good job in my opinion. Because this one is a little bit more concentrated than the 300 HE one that we're going to look at in a second, it did a pretty decent amount of damage, wiping out roughly half. So as you can see, the 380 HE barrage definitely didn't do as well as the 120 HE barrage. I think this is down to how sporadic and random the amount of barrages coming down. The radius is too big here. We need to tighten this radius up a little bit just so it can be on par with the 120 HE barrage, which at this current stage is definitely better. Next, the cluster bomb, and personally I'd say this one would perform a lot better against insects and humans. Against mechanoids, it didn't really do much. Next, the eagle airstrike. This carpet bomb comes down, does okay. Once again, I think this one would probably do a little bit better against unarmed targets. Next, the 500 kilogram bomb. This one, once again, as kind of expected, wipes out roughly half. Next, the 110 mil rocket pods. These ones don't really do anything. They kill a couple, but just tickle them, really. Next, the napalm strike. And in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have tested these against mechanoids because fire doesn't work against robots. It's just kind of how it works. But I'd imagine against a group of tribals or insects, this would do a hell of a lot of damage. Then lastly, the Hell Bomb. This one, funnily enough, did a very good job. And obviously for balancing purposes, you do have to then arm it yourself, which I mean, you could for defensive purposes use these absolutely everywhere. But in terms of damage, this killed everything. For some reason, a couple of Militors survived. I'm not too sure why. So that's going to be everything for the balancing section here. I think overall, everything is very well balanced. The resource cost is great. I think the actual damage that these stratagems are doing is also really, really good. A lot of them are very powerful, but honestly, what are we expecting? These are based off Helldivers 2 stratagems. They're expected to be powerful. I think the big thing here for me is the tech cost, which is a huge barrier to entry early in game, and you're not going to be able to abuse this right off the bat. You're going to have to work towards this and be able to get into a situation to actually use these effectively, just like in Helldivers 2. The only issue for balancing for me is the resource cost. Not necessarily is it underpowered or overpowered, or it's not enough or it's too much. It just doesn't really make sense. 500 steel to craft one stratagem to then only cost 250 steel to craft 4 stratagems in a belt just for some extra components. It's just not really mathsing for me. I think what we need here is just a kind of rejig of the resource cost and a complete overhaul, if anything, just to add maybe a couple more variations of resources and maybe some extra steps here and there. And I think we need to learn how to make the atom materializer, whether that's in a quest, whether we can make that somehow. I don't know. But overall for balancing, I am very impressed with this mod. The balancing here is great, and I can't think of anything else other than the resource cost that is of any concern. So for balancing, I'm very content at giving this a 9 out of 10. Next, let's move on and look at the compatibility of this mod. Are there any bugs I need to let you know about, and how this fit in with your playthroughs? Now, in terms of bugs, according to the Steam Workshop page, nobody's really experienced any bugs. Everybody's just saying that this is a pretty good mod, and good job to Brian. Now, obviously, I did experience some bugs. I couldn't get the stratagem belt to work, and this was something that I generally had a lot of issues with, was the actual system in order to access the stratagems. This for me is a huge issue with this mod. Whilst I appreciate the system that Brian has implemented here is rather unique and actually quite interesting and does kind of work well with this mod, I don't think it's very Rimworld. Personally, I'd actually prefer to be able to craft all the individual stratagems and maybe just have access to like an infinite belt that is then going to be on a timer for how many times I can use it. I personally do not like the system that Brian has used here in order to actually be able to use the stratagems. I think it's too inconvenient, I think it's too time consuming, and I don't think it's actually a very good system. It's buggy. I couldn't get things to work, it wouldn't let me access the stratagems I wanted, it wouldn't let me equip them, and I honestly sometimes had issues actually seeing what stratagems were equipped and whether they were actually working or not. For me, it's a big downfall of this mod, is the actual bugs that I've experienced in the actual system that's being used. Like I said, let me be able to just craft the stratagems I want and be able to equip them to certain colonists like I would with grenades. Next, how this works with your playthroughs. Now, funnily enough, this will not work in the tribal era, the medieval era, or even the early industrial era. However, this mod will work really well against the tribal era and the medieval era. This mod is obviously going to be very niche in the fact that it's coming from HELLDIVERS 2, which is very futuristic as it is, so will only be pretty much used in playthroughs that are sci-fi based and potentially even Archotech. I think this mod would be really good to be using it in like a Save Our Ship 2 playthrough. I'd love to see this maybe be implemented as something that we can use within Save Our Ship 2 and made compatible with that, which would be great. And I think this mod would just work really well against hordes and hordes of insects and mechanoids, and a playthrough based around that would benefit this mod hugely. So overall from compatibility, it does really let this mod down in my opinion. The bugs and the systems that are in place within this mod for me aren't very good, and it hurts for me to say that I don't like this mod because of how the stratagem system works. Now for me, I don't like it. For you, you could love it. You could absolutely adore the system here and think it's really intuitive. For me, personally, it's not for me. Unfortunately, I'm only going to be giving the compatibility section here a 3 out of 10. So next, let's move on and look at my mod recommendations to go with this mod. And like I said in the compatibility section, this is pretty niche into what playthroughs this is going to be working, and as a result, I've recommended quite a niche amount of mods here. Starting off with the HELLDIVERS weapon pack, HELLDIVERS stratagems, HELLDIVERS weapons. Next, the Beans HELLDIVERS armor, more HELLDIVERS, great. Next, Fortifications Industrial by AOBA here to kind of fit with the whole industrial theme. And then we've got vehicles, the Sky Ranger. I thought this looked really cool and just fit with the whole vibe. And lastly, Winston Waves, so we can really sort of target our stratagems against hordes and hordes of insects, mechanoids, and obviously tribals. The mod recommendations here is kind of niche, as you can see. There's not too many mods I could recommend with this comfortably. Yes, you could obviously run and gun and all those exciting things. You can run and gun and throw your stratagems everywhere as well. But in terms of content mods, I just couldn't fit this in. So for my mod recommendation score, if you're playing this in a certain playthrough, it's pretty good and I think you should use it, but most of the time there's not really much point. I'm going to be giving my mod recommendation score a 4 out of 10. So here we are at my conclusion. Now I want to start off by saying that I do like this mod and I like what it introduced into Rimworld, and I like the sort of crossover between HELLDIVERS 2 and Rimworld. I think it works really nicely in certain situations, in certain playthroughs, and in very niche moments. For me personally, the system to actually access the stratagems here is the downfall of this mod. It makes things too difficult, and the bugs that I experienced was something that I've never experienced reviewing another mod, and it has let this down for me. If this mod is fixed and improved, and we've got more reliability as to how to access the stratagems, be able to equip them to certain stratagem belts and everything, then great, this mod will go up hugely in what I think and how this will fit into various playthroughs. So for content, I gave it 7 out of 10, quality 8 out of 10, balancing 9 out of 10, compatibility 3 out of 10, my mod recommendation score was 4 out of 10, giving it the grand total score of 31 out of 50, which is a low rated B mod. Now, whilst I have given this a low score, all we need here is some sort of clarification on how to actually use the stratagems here more effectively without running into bugs and everything, and we could be looking at a lot higher rated B mod. All the things that I've mentioned here that have lowered the score here can be very easily fixed. Otherwise, this is a great mod. But me personally today, also for the first time ever, I'm not actually going to be able to recommend you guys to check out this mod at its current state. I will update this comment section for this mod as I see this mod get updated and change whether or not I think you guys should check this out, because I don't like not being able to recommend things to you guys. But at its current state, the system for the stratagems just isn't working for me. So for me personally, I can't necessarily recommend you this mod. However, you shouldn't always listen to my opinion, and I'm not always right. So what you should do is check out this mod for yourself and see if the stratagem system works for you and whether or not you run into any bugs, because not everybody's going to have the exact same experience. And I highly recommend that you check out Brian's other mods, like the missile mod, which is extremely good and I've previously reviewed and it scored very, very highly. So you have enjoyed today's video, and I hope I haven't upset you too much, Brian, but so consider liking, subscribing, and make sure you tell your mum about me, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.